I'm going to be working on my third and final video on my matter unit plan that for observation. Um, I am not working on the lesson directly after the last video that I sent you because it's just simply reiterating what I already taught them, and I just was using the third day to gauge their understanding of the intense subject like molecules, atoms, and properties. So I don't want to move forward in the unit if they don't understand what those three elements are, because that's basically what the entire unit is about manipulating molecules and atoms and properties, and understanding that different materials are made out of those different kinds of elements. So if they understood the concept the day before, then I will feel comfortable moving on. So I would start the class off by saying, yesterday we discovered that when liquid freezes, it turns into a solid, and when solids warm up, they turn into liquids. So my ticket in the door would be, what kind of change is it when an object can go back to its original form? Physical change or chemical change? The exit ticket was for my previous video had this question, but it was flipped. So it had physical change is when an object can go back to its original form. That was pretty much how the format was. So this time I just flipped it to make sure that they truly understand the concept of physical change. So once they have written it down or had their parents scribe it for them, I will talk through some of their answers and their responses, and I would then show them this video. Wait a minute, I gotta talk my way out of this. Sandy, I think I need to tell you something. What is it? Well, it's just that I'm feeling sort of... I just feel like maybe I need to... Hold that thought, SpongeBob! You do that. So, Christian, in a previous class, Christian asked me, why can't we ever watch SpongeBob videos? And it was something small. He might have been being funny, but I thought that this would have been a good hook, like into the lesson, because a lot of them like cartoons, and Christian mentioned it. So if he saw it, he'll be like, oh, you were listening. So after I showed them the video clip, I would say, why did SpongeBob turn into a puddle? And then I would ask them to raise their hands, and I would go around and ask each student individually, why do you think SpongeBob turned into a puddle? If they have already saw the show, they would probably say, because he was going on an obstacle course. That's something that Zayden might have said. Jake would probably say because he was scared of the obstacle course that Sandy wanted him to keep going through. Lily might have said because he was tired. Tedrick might have said because he got hot. Christian might have said, I agree with Jake, he was scared. And Joniel might say because he didn't like it. I just was thinking of certain responses that some of them could have came up with. And I would say, can this really happen? Can a sponge really turn into liquid like SpongeBob did in the video clip? And I would wait for their responses. Some of them might shrug their shoulders. Some of them might say yes. Some of them might say no. So then I would then say, let's try it out. And I would have little squares of yellow sponge, and I would give each individual child a yellow piece of square, and I would have them try to melt it. So on the previous lesson, they were melting chocolate and ice. So it's easy to melt those things because it has a low melting point. So they can eat it and melt in their mouth. They can rub it and melt in their hands. So I want them to do the same kind of thing with the sponge. Rub it, try to melt it. Put it on their lips. Use their body temperature to melt it to see that it's not going to melt. And once they've done it for about 30 seconds. 25 seconds, 30 seconds, I would say, why didn't it melt? And then I will wait for some of their responses. And then I would let them keep the sponge, and then I would also give each individual child an ice cube. And then I would say, can you try to melt the ice cube the way you try to melt the sponge? And then they'll do the same thing, and they'll see the ice cube slowly starting to melt. They'll, put it in their mouth or whatever. And I will say, did it start to melt? And then hopefully they'll say, yes, it did. And I'll say, why? And that will be the question that'll get their brains working. Why did the ice melt, but the sponge didn't? Why didn't the sponge melt? And I will say, I will wait for their responses. And then I will say, well, what is the difference between the ice and the sponge? Can you guys tell me? So then I will wait for their responses, and then I would go on with saying ice is made out of water and sponge is made out of cellulose, which is made out of a plant. And ice and cellulose have different melting points. It will take more energy and heat to melt a sponge than to melt ice. So my big question is, would ice make good building materials if it's easier to melt? And then I will wait for them to respond. Jake might say no. Zayden might say maybe. Lily might say yeah. If I was a penguin, I was just thinking of responses. Cedric might say yeah if you're an Eskimo. Christian might say right, Eskimos live in igloos. And Joniel might say it's cold. So then I would say different things are made with different properties. Different properties work better depending on what environment you are in. So then I would go about, that would be wrapping up my beginning of my lesson, which is about 6 minutes long. And then I will go about showing them different houses. Hold on a second. One second, sorry. I will go about showing them different houses. So I will start with this house. Does anyone know what this house is called? I think I remember Kristen saying, this house is called an igloo. Why would an igloo be a good house to make? Why would people make an igloo if it's made out of ice? It's so easy to melt. And then I will wait for their responses. Hopefully they'll say it's cold, and it's cold where they make igloos. And I will say, yeah, Alaska, Antarctica, the North Pole. I will mention things like that. Those would be good places to make igloos because it's typically cold there all the time. It normally never gets above the freezing point. I would then go about showing them a different house. What about a house like this? Would this house keep you warm? Is this house strong and sturdy? And I would wait for their responses. And they might say, no, you can see through it. It's holes through it. It wouldn't keep you warm. And I'll say, well, what if you lived in Africa? Is it hot there all of the time? And then hopefully they'll say, yeah, sometimes maybe at night it's not hot. They can make us fire, stuff like that. I want them to have that kind of conversation about these houses. And I'll say, well, what if it rains a lot? Would this be a good house? And hopefully they'll say no because it's holes in it. So then I would then show them this house. A mud house. What about this house? Would this house be a good house to live in? Hopefully they'll say it doesn't have holes in it, but it doesn't really look that nice. And I will explain to them that these houses would be in Mexico, and the Aztecs and Incas used to make mud homes like this because they kept the heat inside. And do you see a lot of trees around? No. Because trees are scarce, they use what's easily available. You see how they can just scrape the mud up and make a home that's cheap and it's easy to move around. So then I would then show them a house like this. What if it flooded would that mud house, stick house, or igloo stand a chance if it flooded and a river was flowing past your home? Would your home make it? And hopefully they'll say no. And I'll say, well, what kind of house do you think you should have? And then I'll wait for their responses, and I'll say, what about a house like this? Would a house like this be a good house for if it flooded? And they'll say, oh, hopefully they'll be like, oh my God, that's nice. I would love to live in a house like that. Or they'll talk to me about a tree house that they've made in the past before, hopefully. And then I will say, people adapt to their environment. So you will find maybe tree houses in places like the Amazon or the jungle. Because there, it rains all the time, or the rainforest. It rains all of the time, which makes the rivers and the streams and the lakes rise. So if you were living on the ground, you would have to constantly make your house over again, over and over and over again, because you would have floods all the time. So they learned how to make their homes up in the trees so that they don't have to constantly worry about remaking it. Well, what about a house like this? Then I will show them a house like this, which is like a typical brick house. Do you think that house is sturdy? Have you seen a house like that? Those houses are typically made all the time. Houses like these and wooden houses with the slats. They make those houses typically in North America, or where the weather is consistent, because you don't have to worry about intense weather changes. So then I would ask them, what house would you rather live in? The igloo, the stick house, the mud house, the brick house, the tree house? Or do you have a house of any sort that you think you would want to live in? Would you want to live in a dome house? Would you want to live on an island? And I would wait for them to give me their responses on what houses they would want to live in. And once they give me their response, because that's part of their participation, I would wrap it up by saying, depending on where we live determines which materials have the appropriate properties to build with. And then I would say, someone said they would want to live in a wooden house. Does wood burn? And then hopefully they'll say yes. Does it break? And then hopefully they'll say yes. Is it strong? And then hopefully they'll think about it and they'll say, well, if it breaks, it is kind of strong too. And then I'll say, what is your house made out of? So they would think of a house that they live in, and what do you think it's made out of? And then I will wait for their responses. And then I would say, if wood is so strong, why are houses destroyed during tornadoes and hurricanes? And then I'll wait for their responses, and they'll say, maybe they'll say, because hurricanes are powerful, hurricanes are strong. So then I'll say, I will pull up a video of a hurricane ripping up a house. 1 second. And then I'll say, what is stronger than wood? What do you think is stronger than wood? And then hopefully they'll say bricks. And then I'll say, well, what is stronger than bricks? I'll say, well, can a hurricane or a tornado rip up a brick house? And then I'll wait for their response. I will show them this.
Sarabia's brother-in-law, Rick Harder, lives across the street and films the impact of Hurricane Iniki on Sarabia's home. Through a crack in plywood protecting his own window, Sarabia keeps an eye on the powerful storm.
Things were flying by that were amazing. Metal roofs, corrugated roofs were like flying guillotines.
Shingles peeled from the roof become dangerous projectiles caught in wind gusts as high as 175 miles per hour.
Metal roof.
Harder becomes alarmed by what he sees and shouts disturbing news to his brother-in-law across the street.
The eaves had separated from the posts. they were flopping in the wind. So we ran downstairs.
So if they make houses so strong, they make houses like this all the time, why would they make it so fragile when it comes to hurricanes and tornadoes? And then I will wait for their response. And then I will show them a house like this. This is a tornado. This is what tornadoes do to houses and cars. Why on earth would we make our houses so fragile if they rip up during weather storms? So I will also explain to them, that I'll let them talk, and then I'll explain to them that we use materials that are easy to move, are easy to build with, and are not expensive. So if we had a house that was made out of all metal, we might feel more secure. But what happens to metal when it gets hot? It burns you, and that can happen to your house. So you don't want your whole house made out of metal. You have to make a house that will make you comfortable, that will make you safe, and that won't just blow over. So you have to think about all those things. We also want to think about the weather, because the weather will dictate what kind of properties we should use in building our house. So I would give every student, I would tell these students to take all that into consideration, and then I would give each student a pile full of marshmallows and a whole box of toothpicks, and I would ask them to construct a home, a sturdy home, because these houses will be on display for our classroom guests, and I would want them to make it look as nice as possible. So I would give them roughly 5 to 7 minutes to make a sturdy house, and once their houses are complete, I would give them Unifix cubes or Legos and ask them to create another strong structure. And I would give them about 5 to 7 minutes to do that. When students are finished, I would then give them their exit ticket, and their exit ticket will consist of which structure is stronger. Why? Are marshmallows good building materials? So they would say yes or no. Are toothpicks good building materials? They can say yes or no. Are Legos and Unifix cubes good building materials? They can say yes or no. What do all of these things represent in real life? So they can say the toothpicks represent wood, the marshmallows represent the drywall, the Unifix cubes represent bricks and stuff like that. They can say stuff like that. And then I would read some of their answers. And once I've read some of their answers, I would say, to sum it up, when we think about things turning into liquid, we need to consider environmental factors like the heat, the cold, and the weather, because those can change our building materials over time and make them weaker. This is called erosion. So then when something erodes, then that means little holes get through it, water gets through it, air gets through it, and it slowly begins to crumble. And when we are thinking about living somewhere, we don't want our living environment to crumble. So I would then wrap it up. I would then ask different students, what do you remember about our lesson today? And then I'll say, which one of your building structures were stronger, the marshmallow one or Unifix cube one? And I would ask them why. And then once they told me why, I would have them put their Unifix cubes or Legos, break it apart and put it away. And then I would have them put their marshmallow structure in a windowsill. And then they can go to their centers. One center would be an ice lab and questions that follow. And then another center would be a construction worker building and questions lab. So they would go one by one, and I would separate them depending on their skill level on which lab they would start with and who would start with me. So if they need more help, I would take the students that need more help and talk to them more. If they don't, they can do their lab on their own, and we can prepare for the next day, which talks about construction of homes and taking things apart and using those same pieces and putting them back together. So it kind of preps them for the next lesson. Thank you.